Hey, Trace Savage here with NonDoc Media. I'm with Michael McNutt, our managing editor, and for the last few months, we've been covering a really complicated but super important story in the state of Oklahoma involving mental health competency restoration in the criminal justice system. It is really complicated. We've written a half dozen articles about it, and so we're here today to try to sum this up in about a 10-minute talk to inform the public a little bit better about some complicated legal matters. Michael, essentially, this deals with folks who have been charged with crimes, but who a judge has deemed incompetent to stand trial because they're dealing with some sort of psychosis from a mental health issue that, again, needs to be addressed before they can stand trial.
Correct. So they need some type of mental health treatment. And
Typically, that's going to be like medication and medication management for addressing the condition that has caused the psychosis that may have led them to commit the crime they are accused of.
correct. And there's a tremendous backlog. The Department of Health Services has uh, not been expedient in treating these inmates. Uh, they can have some local people come in who are contract with the department. Severe cases can go to the forensic hospital in Veneta, which again has a overcrowding available bed situation. So it's been backing up for years, and over a year, a lawsuit was filed in federal
March
court,
2023, I think. Yeah.
and by plaintiffs alleging that a couple of the inmates needing services have been waiting more than a year to get mental health services. And they're claiming that's unconstitutional. The state is aware of it. Let's do something. So they
Yeah.
filed a lawsuit.
Right, and so that's Briggs et al. Is the way the lawsuit is described. Leslie Briggs is an attorney in Tulsa who's representing the plaintiffs as the next friend. Paul DeMuro has also been involved in this case, and Attorney General Gentner Drummond's office from the beginning, back in 2023, has essentially said this is an indefensible lawsuit and has urged the state to settle. The two named defendants are the commissioner of mental health and the director of the hospital in Veneta called the Oklahoma Forensic Center. Both of those individuals have been replaced since the lawsuit was filed in March 2023. Now, ODMH SAS Commissioner Ali Friesen is a defendant, as well as the new director, I believe is Debbie Moran of the Forensic Center. And again, Drummond's office has said this is an indefensible lawsuit. We need to come up with a settlement. We need to create a consent decree, which is a complicated term for essentially the state agreeing with the those suing in the lawsuit that services need to be improved, there needs to be more done, and there will be a 5-year period under which there's monitoring of this by consultants chosen by all the attorneys and parties at hand.
And all this has been going on with most attorneys, litigation behind the scenes, quiet quote behind, it's not open to the public. But you got a wisp of that during the last days of the legislative session when the legislators needed some appropriations to the mental health department in case of a pending settlement.
Yeah, and they put a line item in an appropriations bill for the Department of Mental Health that said $4.1 million that would be used to comply with the goals of the consent decree. It took a little bit to suss out exactly what that involved and then get familiar on this case. We've written a half a dozen articles about it since then, and there was an announcement in, I believe, either June or July, it runs together, that there was an agreement. Well, the reality was that agreement was between General Drummond and between the plaintiffs in the case, but the defendants, Commissioner Friesen and Governor Stitt, on behalf of the defendants, said they were not in favor of the decree as outlined. And that set off a chain of sort of awkward political events that you've been following with what is called the Contingency Review Board, another complicated and obscure body that is what the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the leader of the state Senate. And they met initially in August, I believe,
Correct.
to consider this proposed decree. And what happened there?
Well, basically, the pro tem couldn't make it because of a family matter, but the speaker and the governor talked quite a bit, heard from Commissioner Friesen, and who was opposed to the settlement. And after about an hour and a half, they basically came to the conclusion that this was not a good settlement agreement for the state. Meanwhile, the Attorney General had said, this is too early, it's premature to talk about this, to call the Contingency Review Board because it's just a preliminary agreement. And the Attorney General Drummond in his office were invited to the meeting. They didn't show up for the meeting because they weren't going to take part of it. At the end of that meeting, no action was taken. They just basically expressed their opposition to it. And then more work was done on that agreement, and then adjustments were made. And uh,
Well, one of the adjustments was because this case is in front of Judge Gregory Fizell in Northern District of Oklahoma in the Tulsa area, and he said that one part of the decree, which we'll talk about in a minute, was not in compliance with state law, and so there were going to be some modifications there. It came back with a preliminary approved decree, and then Governor Stitt again called a meeting of the Contingency Review Board. All three voting members showed up that time, and they voted 2-0 with Greg Treat abstaining to reject the decree as proposed. There were frustrations about how much they feared this could cost, frustrations about the term of the decree, frustrations about language relating to a current program for jail-based competency services. There was a lot of political drama and theater.
mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, last week, there was an announcement that the parties had gotten together in front of sort of a former magistrate judge who was acting as a mediator, and they hammered out some amendments. And now apparently all the parties agree on it. And so what was your reaction to that, Michael? It was sort of, oh, everybody's an idiot and we're all mad at each other over here. And then 3 weeks later, yay, well, this is government working. We've got an agreement.
Well, it was surprising to say the least, because the last we heard, they were at a loggerhead. They were both, all sides, the Attorney General and Governor, were still on opposing views. But I guess it shows what happens if you get everybody in a room and let them vent their frustrations. And as we understand it, that meeting lasted 13 hours.
Yeah.
And the mediator just let everybody talk. And there was some disagreement. The governor had hired attorneys for the mental health department and the director of the forensic center, and the attorney general fired the attorney, saying he represents the state. But the mediator apparently convinced let them come in and listen to the discussions anyway. Officially, the attorney general is still representing the state, so they allowed three bets of attorneys: the plaintiff attorneys, the attorney general, and then attorneys representing Commissioner Friesen and the forensic center director. And by them all getting their talking face to face, I think the governor was on speakerphone. These issues apparently were hammered out, and voila, they have an agreement.
Yeah, and so I think something that was really interesting is the changes to this were now it's a 5-year agreement that could terminate early if the state after 3 years can show substantial compliance with the goals of that in terms of timeliness for people getting treatment. And then there was some other language about jail-based services. The really interesting question to me is what's left to come here. There's a meeting in front of, or a hearing, I guess, in court in front of Judge Frizzell that's set for January 15th. And that could be the approval from the judge for this decree to go forward. Then it would go either back to the Contingency Review Board with two new members, Speaker Hilbert, who's been designated, and Pro Tem Paxton, who's been designated by the Senate. They and Governor Stitt would then again vote potentially, unless they don't call a meeting in the Contingency Review Board. If they have other concerns, they could wait once session starts on the first Monday in February. Then the agreement would have to be approved by the entire legislature. So there's about a 2-week period there where we'll see if they want to fast track it through the CRB or have the whole legislature vote on it. And then to really get to the nitty gritty of what this decree would require, they have 90 days to come up with a more robust plan after its approval. There's some prescribed pilot programs that would be for jail-based competency restoration services, basically where mental health professionals would administer that medication and handle those competency restoration components in the setting of a jail in a more rural county. And then there are proposed pilot programs for community-based competency restoration services where a third party would provide that in a residential or a setting, hospital setting in a community. And that would be prescribed for McIntosh County, Muskogee County, Tulsa County, and Oklahoma County. One thing people are concerned about is the judge said actually, that's not even legal in state law yet. So the legislature will have to modify the law to allow for community-based models, which is sort of a new national priority for this type of care. And then the other thing is there's not really anything prescribed for people south of I-40
Mhm.
or west of I-35, and outside the Oklahoma City metro, that is. And so I think you have some legislators who are wanting to know, well, hey, Veneta is in the northeast part of the state. My folks down here in southwest Oklahoma are really far away. How do we handle that? I think all that means, Michael, is there's a lot of questions left to address, and it's going to be interesting to watch in the coming months and when the legislature gets back in session.
Exactly. Just a couple quick dates to keep in mind. January 7th is when our new pro tem and speaker officially are to be elected. And so anytime after that, the contingency review board, if they want to meet, like you mentioned, could meet. And January 15th is the hearing date that the Judge Frizzell has set for this hearing. So that's something to keep in mind. But if the contingency review board does not meet, then that hearing, we have to get approval by the state for that hearing, that this consent decree to move forward.
And it would go to the full legislature the first Monday in February. That means the legislature will be back. That means we'll be back at the Capitol. And that means there's a lot more that we'll be talking about in videos like this. Thanks for watching.